by around 8:05, ay no, 10:05 or until maka 30 plus kayo. Ano? Yan, may question yata si Andre. Andre, what's your question? Napindot. Okay. So we'll be waiting for your classmates na lang. So ayan, I think we can now start. So siguro hindi na papasok, wala nang papasok. Ano? Ayan, so again, good morning, DSS 13. So we are now on our four session. May mga nagtataas ng kamay. Meron ba may tanong muna? Siguro napipindot lang. Again, so we are now on our week 4 session. So, nakaisang buwan na kayo ng pasok. Ang bilis ng panahon, ano? So, nakaka 1/4 na tayo ng semester halos. Yan. So, bago tayo magsimula ng lesson natin, so let me have some reminders first. Okay, una is with regards to your attendance. So, we only have one synchronous class that is only 1 hour per week. So, all of you are expected to attend the synchronous sessions. Ayan. So, dapat ay be on time. So, hindi na po ako nagpapapasok as I have said on our GC ng late ng 10 minutes above. So I am denying their entry na. Just like on the previous or the rest of the sections that I handle. Second, with regards to your activity, please accomplish or submit your activities or turn in your activities on time. So I have observed that some of you or baka sa ibang sections yon, tapos na ang deadline, doon pa lang nagpapasa on nagsesend, nag-accomplish ng Google Form. So, di ba, ang deadline natin, if the activity is given today, the deadline for answering or submitting or accomplishing the Google Form is until Friday, until the coming Friday. Ano? So, for example, kung ngayon ako, which is October 8, kina-Fridayhan ang pinaka-deadline. So, kapag nagsagot na beyond the deadline, then may deduction na po yun sa points para maliwanag. Okay. Isa pa, I have observed that sa ibang classes, merong students na mag-i-in ng maaga, tapos mag-off na or mag-offline na after, magli-leave na ng Google Meet, and then babalik na lang pag matatapos na. Sana wala yun sa inyo. So I know that you are responsible naman enough. So kung may gustong matutunan in our subject, makinig ng mabuti. Lalo mamaya. So for our discussion later, since may activities tayo, makinig mabuti para mapataas or mataas ang makuhang grades sa activities natin later on. Ayan. So again, we are now on week 4. So tapos na tayo for the previous week. Di ba, we have discussed about terms and different kinds of terms. Ngayong week, ang focus ng discussion natin is more on propositions and the different kinds of propositions. Mamaya, I am expecting you to actively participate during our discussion, ha? So, maraming examples and we'll be classifying propositions. Okay, sige. So, I think we can now start. Let me share my... And good morning, everyone. So, we are on our week 4 session under discrete structures 1. So last week, di ba, on our week 3 session, we have discussed about the terms and the different kinds of terms. So for today's session, we'll be discussing about propositions naman. Okay, so by the way, what are propositions? A proposition is a sentence in which the subject and predicate are combined in order to state something as true or false. A proposition therefore either affirms or denies. So yan. So just like in your English subject, a sentence is composed of a subject and predicate, same as with proposition. May pinagkaiba lang siya with regards to sentences. Mamaya i-discuss naman natin yon. So next, the valid propositional sentence excludes the exclamatory, interrogative, and the imperative sentences. So therefore, di ba, as what we have discussed on the first few weeks of our discussion, masasabing proposition if it is declarative in nature. So all other sentence types are not considered as propositions. Okay, so next. Propositions are the material of our reasoning. So kasi you can either accept or reject, di ba, propositions if it is valid or not. A proposition links nouns, pronouns, and phrase to other words in a sentence. So next, the word or phrase that the proposition introduces is called the object of the proposition. So, yan, parang sa language lang din. No? So, the word or phrase that the proposition introduces is called the object of the proposition. So, next, a proposition is a judgment expressed in a language, and a judgment is a mental act in which two or more than two ideas are combined together. So judgment have two types. So di ba, it is either affirmative or negative. So yan yung important characteristic rin ng proposition. So it's a judgment. Unlike sentences na hindi mo pwedeng sabihin na you affirm or negate a given sentence, ang propositions pwede. Okay, so next. A proposition usually indicates the temporal, spatial, or logical relationship of its object to the rest of the sentence as in the following example. So kindly take a look with the given examples. The book is on the table. So we know that the book is on the table. Nasa ibabaw. Ano? Another example, the book is beneath the table. Nasa ilalim naman. So, alam natin kung nasaan siya. Ano? So next, the book is leaning against the table. So other examples are, the book is beside the table. She held the book over the table and she read the book during class. Ayan. So next, let's have and difference of propositions with sentences. Ano nga ba ang pinagkaiba ng propositions with regular sentences? Truth and falsity apply always to proposition. Sabi nga natin, propositions are different from sentences. Sentences have many kinds like questions, exclamations, etc. But none of this can be asserted and denied. So truth and falsity apply always to proposition but not apply to questions or comments or exclamations. Okay? So next, propositions must be differentiated from sentences by means of what they are asserted. It's what I have explained a while ago. And sentences are parts of some language, but propositions are not tied to any given language. So pwedeng kahit anong language natin ang gamitin, it's considered as proposition. For example, it is raining. So we can also say that in different language. For example, Barsat ho rahihay. It's the same as it is raining. So next, a sentence called as proposition when it's both term, the subject, and predicate are nouns. So let's have some example. So in the first example, Ram is a man. As you can see, the subject is Ram, which is a noun, and man which is the predicate, is also a noun. But for the second example, please take a look. Flower is beautiful. Diba? The subject is a noun, but the predicate is an adjective. So therefore, on the two given examples, the first one is an example of a proposition, and the second example is not an example of a proposition naman. Okay? So is that clear? Okay, so let's proceed with the next one. Proposition is always in present tense, but sentences are expressed in all tenses. So yan din yung isa pa sa mga pagkakaiba. So propositions are always in present tense. So ang sentences kahit anong tense, either past, future, di ba, may iba't ibang tenses na na-discuss nung kayo ay nag-English subject. Ano? Proposition explains quantity and quality, but sentence does not explain it. Mamaya, i-discuss natin yung with regards to quantity and quality of propositions. And all propositions are sentences, but not all sentences are propositions. Since yan naman ay na-discuss na natin kanina, yung difference between propositions and sentences. So now let's talk about the different kinds of proposition. May iba't ibang klase ng propositions. First is categorical or attributed. Kailan nagiging categorical or attributed ang isang proposition? It is proposition that asserts or denies that all or some of the members of one category, the subject term, are included in another, the predicate term. So kapag ganoon, it's categorical or attributed. Pwede rin naman siya ay hypothetical. So hypothetical kapag it is a compound proposition which contains a proposed or tentative explanation. So, in our future discussion, next week, ang i-discuss naman natin is more on compound and atomic propositions. May dalawang klase pa kasi yan. And then, para makabuo ng compound proposition, pinagsasama ang dalawang atomic propositions. And nagamit lang ng connectors, conjuncts, for example. Yan. So, may iba't ibang klase. It can either be conditional proposition, disjunctive proposition, and conjunctive proposition. I-discuss naman yan next week isa-isa. Kaya, pahapyawan na lang natin. So, next. So, pwede ring existential ang proposition. It is a statement is one affirming the existence of something or kind of things. For example, the Yeti exists or unicorn exists. So those are examples of existential propositions. Pwede ring non-existential. For example, this is the negation of an existential statement. So iyan na lang natin. I-negate yung existential, siya ay non-existential na. Okay? So next. Pwede ring maging simple. Ito yung sinasabi ko kanina. Simple are atomic propositions or primitive or prime propositions. So yung simple lang, single subject, single predicate, simple proposition siya. And it's compound when it's a combination of simple propositions using connectives. May iba't ibang klase pa rin ng compound propositions. Ayan. So next. So let's talk about the elements of propositions. Every proposition has matter and form. Ano kaya yung matter at ano ang form ng propositions? So let's proceed. Next. The subject and predicate are called the matter of the given proposition. So the subject and predicate are called the matter, the thought, or the content of the proposition because they are the material out of which the proposition is made. So next, the copula or bonding verb is called the form. Yung verb natin on a given proposition, it's called the copula, which is the form of a given proposition. So the copula or bonding verb is called the form, the structure of a proposition, because it is the unifying principle that maintains the structure of the proposition and imparts to its materials the nature of a proposition. So hence, we can say that a valid proposition is one which is true in its matter and correct in its form. So dalawa dapat ang tinitingnan. A valid proposition is one which is true in its matter and correct in its form. Remember that always, mga anak. Next. Okay, so we will be talking about the three basic elements of propositions. First is the subject. Ayan. So in our discussion, we will denote that as capital S. So it is about whom something asserts or denies. We also have the predicate, which will be denoted by capital letter P. What is asserted or denied of the subject? And we have the copula, which is denoted by capital letter C. This is a conjunct, both subject and predicate terms. So remember that copula will be negative or affirmative. So examples are linking verbs is, or are. So in the negative proposition, the negative copula is not, am not, are not, separates or divides the predicate from the subject. Ayan. So it can either be negative or affirmative. Kapag negative, lagyan nyo lang ng not yung mga linking verbs. So yun na siya. Negative copula na siya. Okay, so next. A proposition that expresses an affirmation and uses an affirmative copula is called an affirmative proposition. And one that expresses negation or denial and uses a negative copula is a negative proposition. Madali namang intindihan, ano? Basta ang linking verbs nyo ay positive, is, are, yan, mga affirmative. Basta ganun ang copula. Kapag naman negative ang proposition, ang copula or linking verbs, lalagyan nyo lang ng negation. Kunyari, is not, are not, am not. Ayan, mga examples. So next. So let's have some examples. Okay. The first proposition is an example of an affirmative proposition. Here, the given proposition is politicians are liars. If we are going to identify the parts, politicians is our subject. It's connected by are, which is the copula, and it's affirmative in nature. And our predicate is liars. I know. So next, for the second example, politicians are not liars. So as you can see, same subject, politician, same predicate. But the copula, ang ginamit na is a negation, are not. So therefore, it's negative. Ano? Negative proposition. So next. Now, let's talk about categorical propositions. Ano ba ang ibig sabihin ng categorical proposition? A categorical proposition is simply a statement about the relationship between categories. So it states whether one category or categorical term is fully contained with another, is partially contained with another, or is completely separate. Tatlo ang categories niya. Ano? Pwedeng siya is fully contained with another, partially contained with another, or is completely separate. Yan. So let's talk about quality of propositions naman. Propositions may have quality, either affirmative or negative, just like what we have discussed on the previous slide. So next, they may also have quantity, such as some, most, or all. The all quantity is also described as being universal, and other quantities particular. Ayan. So mamaya i-discuss naman natin universal, singular, saka particular. Now, let's talk about the quality of the proposition. It is the quality of the copula, yung mga linking verbs natin, and the copula alone that determines the quality of the proposition, whether it is affirmative or negative. Yan. Since the subject and the predicate have no bearing on the quality of the proposition, propositions of the structures A is non-B and non-A is non-B are thus affirmative propositions. Tandaan na nakabase lahat talaga sa copula para siya ay maging affirmative or negative propositions. Okay, take a look at the given examples. None of the students will go. So as you can see, yung verb natin dyan ay will go. Ano? Pero ang negation ay nilagay doon sa unahan, sa ating subject. None of the students. Pero yan ay affirmative pa rin in nature. Another example, no cat has 9 tails. The subject here is no cat. Pero yung ating copula, the linking verb has. And our predicate is yung ito, 9 tails. Pero tingnan nyo, yung negation ay nilagay doon sa simula ng subject, no cat. Pero, di ba, as what we have discussed earlier, the quality of the proposition solely depends on the copula. Kung siya ay positive, affirmative. Pag may mga not, that is negative. Pero yung ganito, it's still affirmative in nature. Other example, angels are non-material beings. Angels is the subject connected by are, which is the copula, pero ang negation ay nilagay sa predicate. Thus, this proposition is also considered as negative. Next, let's talk about the quantity of the proposition. Yan. Pwedeng maging singular ang isang proposition in terms of quantity. Singular kapag the subject term is standing for one definitely designated portion of its absolute extension. So uses words like this, that, etc. Pwede ring particular proposition. A proposition that uses particular subject term. For example, so kapag sinabing particular, di ba, a portion lamang ng given na population. Some, several, few, and others. The subject term is standing for an indeterminately designated portion of its extension. Ayan. And then, pwede ring universal. Universal proposition is a proposition that uses singular, indefinite, collective, and universal terms which focuses on the subject. For example, all, every, each, any, group, etc. So yan, kapag man nakakita kayo ng mga ganyang quantifiers before the subject, universal siya. Okay? Remember, singular propositions are also considered universal. Next, if the subject term is indeterminate, ibig sabihin, hindi nyo malaman kung siya ba ay singular, universal, or particular. That is, if it is not modified by any sign of singularity, particularity, or universality, then the proposition is indeterminate. Remember that by its sense, the quantity of the proposition can be determined. In case of doubt, assume that it is particular and thus avoid attempting to draw more out of the premises that may actually be in them. Pero kapag hindi mo talaga alam, kung walang any sign of singularity, particularity, or universality, siya ay indeterminate. Sa activity nyo, may option, sa activity nyo mamaya, may option about na indeterminate. So in cases na ganoon, edi indeterminate ang ilalagay. So apat na magiging options. So next, okay, so let's have the following exercises. Ayan. So I have here some propositions. You are going to determine the quality and the quantity of the given proposition. Let's start with the first one. Manila is a populous city. Okay, sige. So let's identify the quality and the quantity of the given propositions. Let's start with the first example. Manila is a populous city. Sige nga, who would like to give the quality and quantity of the given proposition? Who would like to answer? Just raise your hand if you would like to answer.
Nandiyan pa ba ang BSCS 1.3? Diba? Review muna tayo. Kapag sinabing quality, it all depends on the copula or the linking verb used in a proposition. Kapag siya ay positive, for example, is, are, pero pag nilagyan nyo na ng not, nagiging negative siya. So, dalawa lang pagpipilian. Pag quality, it's either affirmative or negative. And then, yung quantity ng proposition depends on the subject or object of the proposition. So, may tatlong klase or apat. Una is singular. Ikalawa, particular. Ikatlo, universal. At ikaapat ay indeterminate. So ngayon in our activity, you are just going to identify the quality at the same time the quantity of the given propositions. Who would like to answer the first one? Manila is a populous city. Sige, Rosemary.
Yung ano, sir, yung number 1 po, yung quality is affirmative po.
Mm-hmm.
Tapos po yung quantity ba yun?
Yes, quantity is?
Lang po.
Ano yung quantity na? Singular, particular, universal, or?
Singular po.
Yes, very good. So therefore,
Singular po.
yan, tama yun. So for the first example, this is an example of a singular affirmative proposition. Bakit singular? Manila is the subject of the given proposition. Manila is a proper noun. So automatic siya ay pasok sa singular. And sabi nga natin, the copula is affirmative in nature. So it's singular affirmative. Now let's go with the second example. That man is sick. Sige. Let's have Kit.
Singular affirmative.
Very good. Singular affirmative pa rin. Bakit? Since we have this, that man, that here represents singularity. It's a quantifier for singularity, that. And is affirmative. So singular affirmative. Very good. Next, some students is shouting at the top of his voice. Let's have Gerlin.
Particular po, affirmative.
Very good. Particular affirmative. We have a particular quantifier which is some, and is pa rin ang linking verb natin which is affirmative. So tama. Particular affirmative. All men are mortal. Who would like to answer? Gerald.
Universal affirmative.
Very good. Universal affirmative. Makaka-perfect yata ang BSCS 1.3 sa activity mamaya. All men, we have all as the quantifier for universality, and are is an affirmative linking verb, affirmative copula. Pero may question ako. Paano kapag tinanggal niyo yung all? Kapag tinanggal niyo yung all, ang mangyari, men are mortal. How would you classify that? According to quality and quantity. Yes, Matthew? Particular pa rin. Bakit? Oo. Ayan, men are mortal. Nasabi ko rin sa discussion kanina na if hindi talaga alam, sabihin na lang na particular. For example, men, hindi mo naman alam kung siya ay portion of lahat ba or a portion lang ng population ng lahat ng men are mortal. So, to be safe, mag-particular ka na lang. Pero, sa activity nyo mamaya, merong option kasi mga anak for indeterminate, for the quantity mga anak ha. So, therefore, for the quantity, kapag men lang, men are mortal, it's classified as indeterminate positive or indeterminate affirmative. Pero tama rin yung sinabi kanina ni Matthew, pwedeng particular affirmative. Pero mas tama kung sasabihin yung indeterminate affirmative. Okay? So now let's go with the last example. A dog is barking outside my window. Yes, Donna?
Singular affirmative po, sir.
Yes, very good. Singular affirmative. Sige. Siguro wala nang question about the quantity and quality of given proposition. So now let's move on to the second part of the discussion.
The Aristotelian fourfold classification of categorical propositions. Yan. So may apat na categories under this classification. Pwedeng universal affirmative which has a symbol of A, universal negative which has a symbol of E, particular affirmative with a symbol of I, and particular negative with a symbol of O. So now, with regards to the form, pag sinabing universal negative, affirmative, all plus the subject plus the copula plus the predicate. So, ganito ang magiging format niya. All S is P. Universal affirmative. Okay? So, yung mga quantifiers ng universality ay makikita sa unahan. So, kapag naman universal negative, ganito ang nangyayari. No plus subject plus copula plus predicate. So, ang format niya, no S is P. So, that is universal negative. Pag naman particular affirmative, ang format naman niya is some plus subject plus copula plus predicate. So, ang example, some S is P. So, quantifiers ng particularity. Hindi lang some ang pwede, marami pang iba. And then, for particular negative, some plus subject plus copula plus predicate. So this will be the proposition. Some S is not P. So makikita nyo naman, madali lang naman tandaan, universal affirmative. So this is with regards to the given quality, quantity muna, yung una, and then followed by the quality. Pag universal affirmative, edi universal ang kanyang quantity, ang quality ay affirmative. Pag universal negative, universal ang quantity, negative ang quality, and so on. Okay? So next. Ayan. So let's start with the first. Universal affirmative proposition is a proposition having a universal quantifier and an affirmative copula. For example, all hard-working students are fast learners. So we have used the universal quantifier all, and our copula, which is R, is positive or affirmative in nature. Kaya siya universal affirmative. Another example, every judgment is an act of the mind. So we have used the universal quantifier every, and then our copula is affirmative in nature. So those are universal affirmative propositions. Next, let's talk about, ayan, also, indefinite affirmative and singular affirmative propositions are considered universal affirmative. May mga special cases, ha? Kapag indefinite affirmative at singular affirmative, ang propositions, under na rin siya ng universal proposition. Example, man is volleyball. So, hindi natin ma-determine ang quantity ng given proposition kasi walang mga quantifiers. So, it's indefinite affirmative. Bakit affirmative? Kasi is positive ang dating. So, siya ay indefinite affirmative pero under pa rin siya ng universal affirmative. Next example, the insect is poisonous. Singular. Kasi the insect, pero ang ginamit na copula is affirmative. So this is singular affirmative which also belongs to universal affirmative. Tandaan ito kasi sa activity mamaya may mga ganyang cases din. Next category is universal negative proposition. So a proposition having universal quantifier and a negative copula. For example, no transparencies are plastic. Ayan. So, you can see a universal quantifier and a negative copula there. Another example, or let's go to the next slide. Also, indefinite negative and singular negative propositions are considered universal negative. Okay, so example, beauty is not sensible. So as you can see, beauty, it's indefinite kasi hindi mo naman siya mako-quantify. Is not sensible. Is not is negative in nature. So indefinite negative is an example of or under universal negative. Another example, this snake is not venomous. So, ang ating subject, this snake is singular and our copula is negative. Ano, singular negative is also considered as universal negative. Next, the third category is particular affirmative proposition. It's a proposition having a particular quantifier and an affirmative copula. So examples, few students are in the dean's list. So as you can see, it uses the quantifier few, which is particular in nature, and our copula are is positive in nature. So particular affirmative. Some policemen are rich. Some is a particular quantifier, and R is a positive copula or affirmative copula. So yung mga examples na yan ay examples ng particular affirmative propositions. Certain men are geniuses. Ayan. Another example of a particular quantifier is certain. Ano, and uses the positive or affirmative copula are. So next. Ayan. Also, keep in mind that indefinite affirmative propositions belong to this category. For example, men are selfish. So we don't know, walang quantifier na nakalagay, kaya masasabi natin siya ay indefinite or indeterminate. But the copula is positive in nature, so are. So therefore, men are selfish is indefinite affirmative in nature. And that belongs to the third category, particular affirmative proposition. So another example, women are fickle. Is it some, a large minority? So hindi definite ang quantifier, but the copula is positive, kaya siya ay nasa particular affirmative pa rin. The last category or classification is the particular negative proposition. So it's a proposition having a particular quantifier and a negative copula. Ayan. So examples, some honest people are not married. So some is particular quantifier, are not ang ginamit na copula. So particular, negative siya. Another example, majority of the soldiers are not brave. Majority means halos lahat pero hindi lahat. So particular siya. And then, are not ang ating copula. So therefore, this is a particular negative proposition. So also, keep in mind that indefinite negative propositions belong to particular negative proposition. Examples, politicians are not corrupt, but we don't know what is the quantifier. Politicians is an indefinite subject, pero ang ginamit na copula is are not. So which is negative in nature. So it's indefinite negative but belongs to particular negative propositions. Another example, priests are not celibate. So ano ba yan? Many, few, certain ba yan? Or lahat? Hindi natin alam. So it's indefinite. And the copula is negative din or not din ang ginamit. Okay? So this summarizes the Aristotelian fourfold classification of categorical propositions. Ayan, makikita nyo. Based on the quality and quantity, kapag universal affirmative, it's letter A. Ano, denoted by letter A. Universal negative E, particular affirmative I, and particular negative, it's O. Okay? And now, it's time for some activity or some items para naman medyo ma-test or ma-exercise natin ang learnings for the day. Okay, so kindly determine or classify the following propositions according to the Aristotelian fourfold classification of propositions. Let's start with all cats
Okay, let's start with all cats are animals. What is the classification of that? And then explain why. So let's have Kit.
All cats are animals po. Answer ko po is A. Since all po meaning universal and R which is a affirmative copula po.
Okay, so therefore it is a universal affirmative proposition. Saglit lang mga anak ha. There's something biglang naghang. Just wait for a minute. Ayan, so let's resume na. So let's have no man is immortal by nature. So what is the classification? Yes, Nash. Steve. Yes, kindly answer
Ano po?
na.
Universal negative po.
Okay, universal negative. Next, let's have the third example. Some roses are red. Let's have Mark.
Particular affirmative po.
Yes, particular affirmative. That's correct. Next, Gloria is the president of the Philippines. Rosemary.
Universal affirmative po.
Okay, tingnan mabuti na. Gloria is the president of the Philippines. Let's have Jerlyn or Gerlyn.
Singular affirmative po.
Yes, singular affirmative. Pero saan kasama siya talaga? Among the four classifications, where the singular affirmative belongs. Saan kasama talaga? Let's have Gerald. Yes.
Universal affirmative po.
Very good. Universal affirmative. And then, for the last example, let's have some roses are not red. Let's have Anne Aubrey.
Particular negative, sir.
Very good. Particular negative proposition. Okay, i-explain ko lang mga anak. So, saglit lang. Let me stop sharing first. Ayan. I-explain ko lang. Baka malito kayo sa activity about the Aristotelian fourfold classification. Diba, ang indeterminate, for example, kapag indeterminate ang quantity ng proposition, pwedeng dalawa kasi siya, di ba? Either you have universal or pwede ring particular. Di ba? Sa inyong quiz or sa inyong activity, pag indeterminate ang quantity ng proposition, for example, doon nga sa example natin na men are fallible, affirmative siya, pero hindi mo alam kung ang men ay particular or universal. Sa ating quiz, i-check nyo na lang yung dalawa kung matcheckan, ha? It's either particular affirmative or once lamang po makakapagsagot ng activity. Kaya please, kindly, paki-secure or paki-ensure na finalize at nasagutan lahat since once lang po nakakapagsagot ng Google form, bawat student. And kindly, please accomplish the learning task or learning activity on time before or bago mag-deadline. Okay? Mga anak, do you have any more questions? Sige, just raise your hand if you have questions. Ayan, mukhang wala. Ayan, may tanong. Matthew, yes, Matthew. As a subject. So, di ba ang subject is the matter and the based on our discussion a while ago, the subject is the matter. Kasi siya talaga yung object, pinaka-object nung given na proposition natin. So that's why it becomes, so since siya ay object of the proposition, it's the matter. And the copula, it's the form of the proposition. So I think wala na. So let's have our documentation. Please turn on your camera and give your happiest or biggest smile para makita ko kayo. Dapat nga naka-turn on na ang inyong camera habang tayo ay nagkaklase para makita ko. Last time may nakita ko sa students na biyahe habang nagkaklase. Saan kaya papunta? Okay, sige. Within 3 counts, give your smile. 1, 2, and 3. This also serves as our attendance kasi. Okay, sige. So kung wala ng questions, so let's end. By the way, the lecture has been already uploaded in our Google Classroom. Just wait for the activity. I-upload ko na rin. Basahin mo ng lecture at pasadahan bago sagutan ng activity para mas mataas ang makuhang score. Ayan, so kung wala ng question, you can leave the meeting. So thank you for attending our class. See you again on our next week's session on Saturday. Sige.
Goodbye, sir.
Thank you po.